Shop Macy's VIP sale, going on now. Use your coupon or Macy's card and take an extra 30% off the latest fall trends from designers that rarely go on sale. And save 15% off skincare, makeup, fragrances, and more. Plus, shop fall specials for even more great deals on top brands at Macy's. Savings off regular and already reduced prices. Exclusions apply.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM-Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management, archaeology, and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello and welcome to the CRM-Archaeology Podcast, episode 298. And joining me today, in no particular order, is Doug from Scotland.
Well, I'd say Doug in Scotland.
That's right.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like he's from Scotland.
He's so
Although
Scottish.
That would be fun. Give us your best brogue.
No.
I know.
They have a different hate crime laws over here. So no.
Yeah. And then Heather, not from California.
Yes, and I'm not doing a California accent because I'm not from California.
But dude, it leaks in over time. I'm telling you. Like I think you sound more California than when I first met you.
Really?
Yeah. It's funny. Like I have a ton of friends with the same story. It's just that sort of cliche SoCal Valley thing. It angles in their speech. But anyway, our topic for today is actually car accessories. Now, in the past, we've done shows on what kind of automobile to buy for CRM, right? And we all had our choices. And I remember, I'm a car guy, right? But I remember being just jealous and bummed that Bill came up with the Toyota minivan as the best CRM car. And I thought that was just the greatest choice. But in terms of once you pick your car, what kind of accessories are worth it to buy, to add on? What works for you in the field? What are some things that kind of the public at large thinks you should have in the field, but really don't work, right? And so I just took a couple minutes to think about this, and I thought we could all just kind of talk about maybe experiences we've had with certain accessories on our car that maybe they worked really great, or stuff that you bring with you in the field where it really like saved you at the last minute. And I had thought I would just start with one or two, and then the rest of us could just join in and we can go from there. So first off, I thought in the no category, something that you do not need with your field vehicle is a winch. You do not need a winch. Now, I'm probably the one in 10,000 people who's actually used a winch on the front of a truck. But of course, again, all cliches apply. I use the winch in the jungle in Belize to winch out a truck from like heavy mud and stuff. And this is where you have to like take the winch and pull the cable out and tie it to something and turn it on. And I think it even had an extra battery that it ran on in the truck. I can't remember, but it is involved. They're super expensive. They're heavy. You do not need a winch. On the flip side, in the sort of yes, maybe category, are stuff like tow cables or tow straps.
Yes.
Those are cheap, and easy to store. And all you need with tow straps is some other car to pull you out, or tow straps can also come with their own kind of winching thing. But usually what happens is you put the tow straps on the one car that's in trouble, you put it on the second car, and then you pull yourself out. Done and done. No need for a winch.
Yeah, I've added those when we had fleet cars. Those tow straps are a must.
Yeah.
And the other that I would put along with that are bolt cables. And I know that sounds like, why would you need bolt cables? So
what are those?
I'm sorry, bolt cutters.
There you go. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, that's a great one. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, that is for safety wise an accessory. Very, very important.
Yeah.
Reason quickly, especially here in California, you can be out off road and all of a sudden a fire happens and you're rushing out of where you are. You run in, and it's happened. I mean, it's happened to me, not during a fire, but you encounter the gate that you came in, and a rancher has locked it behind you. And maybe you don't even have you don't have the code, you can't get out. And that's the worst situation you could be in if it's in a fire. So having bolt cutters is important. Yeah.
That's a fantastic one. Yeah. I think probably all of us have been in a situation like that. Maybe not so dire, but where you're like, oh my God, they locked the gate, Yes. So yeah, bolt cutters. I've been there. It's a great one. There's some other small ones that people don't think of. Like I've had great success with a bike pump, like having a bicycle pump, like in the back of your truck, to pump up your tires, to pump up your friend's tires, to pump up your spare tire. Man, if I can do one thing for everyone, go out and check your spare tire right now. I guarantee you it's flat, right? Yep. So little stuff like that, a bicycle pump, and actually a quality bicycle pump. So there's so often on this, we'll recommend things, but if you buy a cheap one, it's going to break in the emergency. So I loved having bicycle pumps. And speaking of good stuff, just get stuff like extra money is well spent on like good tires, a good battery, stuff like that. I never buy crappy tires or batteries anymore. Like I haven't for a long time, because good ones just are better. They're safer. They last longer, all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah. Tires are essential.
Yeah. And you don't need super knobby, crazy tires, right? Like you'll find that those will give you worse gas mileage. You just need good ones, like quality products.
And then along that line, I would also add, depending on where you're at, if you end up in an icy area, it's not totally, frozen ground yet. So you're still out there working, kitty litter, things like that to get you out. And then some pieces of wood if it's muddy and you need to be like, sometimes if it happens, people don't have those toe straps. You still need to get out of that mud. So something to get underneath the tire to get you out.
Totally. How many times have I been in that situation and then you're like scavenging far and wide for a piece of wood? Like, it's so true. And if somebody just has a piece with them, oh my God, it just saves you. Speaking of the spare tire and that area of thing, dude, I've been screwed up by this a bunch of times. Make sure to buy a good quality lug nut wrench, dude, and one that fits. Know your lug sizes. These are the lugs on your wheels, right? If you buy a crappy lug nut wrench, it will break while you're trying to use it, right? Buy a big one, spare no expense, Craftsman brand, that kind of stuff. Go high end for your lug nut wrench, because you want to be able to put the extra pressure and weight on that wrench and have it not break and have it make a nice seal to the nuts.
I was actually going to loop back to your first point on the winch. Yeah, I was going to say everyone thinks they're going to use it, and rarely do you actually get stuck. But when you do, guaranteed there's not going to be a tree lined up with whatever vehicle you need. Like you may have it, and because I've seen it before, because you have to have the right angle on the winch to be able to pull the vehicle out. And usually, so I worked in the Southwest. Like, some of it's going to be
where trees are so abundant there.
But like I was just thinking, like, I've worked in forest areas. That's a little bit better. So if you're working in a forest area, good chance you might be able to find the right tree. But actually, even then, it's hard, because a lot of times if you're in the forest, you're on a road most likely, or in a field, where there are actually very few trees.
Yep.
And I've seen people trying to like loop it and go at the wrong angle and actually end up getting just more stuck. Because if you're not straight on where you're pulling out, you're going to pull at an angle, and you're either going to break the winch, or you're going to pull the vehicle sideways.
I've seen that too.
Even more stuck. Like there's this idea that you'll be able to use it, but honestly, you guys are spot on with like tow ropes and another vehicle, because there's the chances one, the chances you're going to need it are going to be very low. And then the chances you're going to do it and have like, I don't know, a perfect boulder /
have success. Yeah.
Yeah. Also like a California redwood that won't snap, pulling out, your 2-ton truck, or you're not going to, usually what's going to happen is you're just going to pull out whatever small pine tree that you hooked up to. And that's it. You've done nothing but ruin a perfectly good tree.
Exactly. And it's dangerous too, and I remember the one time we used it, we were just messing around forever trying to get it to work, trying to get it right. Everything you just said, Doug, we did. It's like, oh, the angle's wrong. Like it was such a mess. I almost think we finally had a second car come and we just unhooked it and used tow cables anyways. I think that's what happened. Anyway,
here's a couple cautionary, cautions, whatever. Do not go out alone into these areas. And so that's just a reminder, just because you have a souped up truck doesn't mean that you can handle everything. And when you go into some of these really back areas, with no, reception, and that leads to the next thing I was going to add, but just don't let companies pressure you into going into dangerous situations, but specifically or potentially dangerous situations alone. Because that, even if you're in a vehicle, it's just precarious. It's not worth it. As people have said, this job's not worth dying for. Along that line, I think what's essential, yes, you lose reception, but having these safety beacons so that if something happens, you can put out a signal is an excellent tool. So all companies should have these for their field staff, where when they are going out, that they do have a safety beacon. It usually has 3 different settings where it will just say, it'll just be a location. There's another one where it'll actually contact somebody specifically that's programmed with that system to contact, because you have, okay, I'm safe, but I have an issue I need help with. And then there's like a emergency. I need help now. And here's my location. So those, I think, especially because the type of work we're in, we're always in areas without any cell reception. You shouldn't go anywhere without those beacons.
Right. Oh, that's a great one. And speaking of that, on the flip side, like I love how we're bringing up these little sort of safety things, on the flip side, people who are just sort of too big for their britches with their cars, it's often because their car is full of stuff you actually don't need. It's a 4x4, which you tend to actually not need. And they have all this stuff on it that like showcases their macho-ness, right? It'll have like an exterior gas can. It'll have like an axe strapped to the side, like one of those red like firemen's, and it'll have some crazy ass roof rack. Like it'll have my favorite. It'll have a snorkel. Like really? Oh yeah, you need a snorkel in Southern California. And for those if you don't know, the snorkel are those things you put on kind of the side of the 4x4. That means you can drive like underwater.
Yes.
And like, as long as the snorkel's like above.
Snorkel.
No, it's a piece that you put like on the side, sort of on the front next to the
I know
windscreen.
what you're talking about. Yeah. I've seen those.
So stupid. Oh, and super beefy skid plates and all that crap. Look, you don't need that. Ground clearance is your friend. I will say that ground clearance is nice, but I've seen you need to know how to drive. You need to know how to like read your environment. I've seen people do incredible things with a Honda Accord. Okay. So you just,
or a Toyota Echo. I used to have a Toyota Echo. You wouldn't believe where I could go with that thing.
Exactly.
That doesn't have clearance, but that thing was just a beast. I could go anywhere with it. And the nice thing about the Toyota, and no, I don't suggest you go and get a Toyota Echo, but when you it's a good lesson that you don't have to go out and get the best, vehicle and buy all the bells and whistles. I think sometimes people do that, and there are certain personalities that tend to do that, but I think, you have, everybody complains about how little we make in this, right? Which isn't true totally, but yes, you are limited in funds. Why go out and spend, literally some of these $50,000 on a setup when you don't even know what you're going to need? So go out, make sure you have all the safety equipment, make sure you have the necessities. But then as you work, you'll start realizing, oh, you know what? This would be a good thing to have. But don't go buy everything and then realize I only need a quarter of what I bought. It's a waste of money.
It totally is. And all that stuff that we were joking about, it's like, if it's 4x4, to me, you want to think of it as, this is the stuff you use to get yourself out of trouble, not into trouble. Yes. You know what I mean? Yeah. You know, I got 4x4, so I'm going to go down this road. No.
Security. Yeah.
Yeah. When you find yourself messed up, you go, okay, I think I'll engage the 4x4. And actually with that, we'll wrap up here on segment 1. I know Doug has something to say, and he can start it off with segment 2. I'll see you guys in a minute. Hello, and welcome back to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 298. And we have been talking about accessories for your automobile to make your day a little bit nicer and easier in the CRM world. And Doug, I know you had something to add. What's up?
Yeah, so it's one of those things that usually sort of gets lumped into that sort of snorkel aspect of vehicles, but actually super important. And it would be actually mud flaps. And of course, this will depend on your vehicle, but mostly for trucks, it's a good thing. And it's not so much for, the mud and protection like that. It's actually, if you have a crew and you have 2 vehicles, that will save so many windshields.
Yeah.
Just because, if you're going along rocky roads, you're going to be just churning up all those small stones. And if you don't have those mud flaps, they're going to start flying back, and whatever vehicle you have behind you is going to get them. And eventually one of those is going to hit that windshield right and crack it. And I remember we replaced so many we didn't replace. You got the person come out and do the little fix until they added mud flaps to all the vehicles, because it was just a thing where you're following people along, and without the mud flaps, those stones are going to be shooting out there at not quite bullet velocity, but you wouldn't want to get hit with it, and definitely not your windshield. Yeah, it's one of those things that people sort of forget about. It usually gets tossed into that sort of souped up truck thing, but actually it is one thing I would say in archaeology, not overrated.
I think that one's great. That one's smart. And as you said, very overlooked. But I think we've all been there too. We've been there on those roads because so often, of course, in CRM, there's a crew. And almost always there's more than one car. And who's ever is in the back, they get it. So I think that's a great one. Often overlooked. In terms of broken windshields and other difficulties, I've said this before on the podcast, but also I highly recommend having a AAA membership. So, in the United States, the American Automobile Association membership, that thing is just gold in terms of you need a tow, you need a jump, that kind of stuff. I've been a member for over it's something crazy. I started when I was 18 or something. I've been a member over 30 years. And I love that place. I just get to know the AAA office that's close to you, because you can get a bunch of stuff done there, a bunch of stuff on your car. All of a sudden you don't have to go to the DMV anymore. Yep. Yeah, which is a godsend. And there's other things that can help you with the travel passports. That's a great thing to have in your back pocket.
So I have a couple things to add as far as the outside of the car. Then I have some ideas for the inside. But for the outside, if you have an open bed, highly recommend either putting a cab on it, a top on it, or putting a top, a lockable top on it. When we're traveling and you go into a hotel, the last thing you want to do is lug all that field equipment into your hotel room. So having a lockable bed is a good thing. Even better is just putting a cab on it if you can afford it, if you have a truck. And that will save you a lot of time. The other thing is, a lot of people like to put those toolboxes, those metal toolboxes that are attached and permanent in the bed, which when it comes to archaeology can be very problematic. When you put those in there, it limits what you can fit in your bed.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's a tough one.
It is, but if you have a cab, so what I would suggest, if you're going to put a cab on it, put a cab that has those compartments on the sides of the cab. Mm-hmm. So it's on the side of the truck, and you can actually access them. They're totally lockable, and you can access them from the side top.
Yeah.
And then you're not taking up your bed space. If you put those big toolboxes in, unless you can do it on one side, don't put it on the end. If you can do it on just one side, then that's a better place to put it. But when you put it on the end, it really limits your ability to fit as much as possible in the back of that truck.
Right. I would agree with you. It's one of those things that I tend to recommend that kind of thing, but it also can be done like without that thought. Like if you, I tend to like sort of a trunk or back organizer of some kind. And this can be for SUVs too, where you have some sort of organization system. There's different things you can buy. I tend to recommend those. I think they tend to work. I used to use the old school milk crate situation, which works, but it's much better to have something that's better integrated.
As far as that organization system, if this would be more for companies, small companies that can maybe write, I mean, anybody could write it off. I don't know if this expense is worth it for an individual, but they do have these drawer systems where you can put the organizer on the bed. So then and it's just flat and it has a drawer that pulls everything out. Then you can put stuff on top of that. So it's usually maybe, like 8 inches tall, and it has this drawer system, but then you still have the full bed.
Right.
Yeah, that works well.
Yeah, those are cool. Doug.
Yeah, it was brought up by what Heather said about, lockable, obviously theft. And one other thing, it's not going to be thought of as an accessory for a vehicle, but it really is your insurance. And actually making sure that it has theft and who's covered. Because, so if you have your own vehicle, it's worth checking out the fine print on your insurance of, are you actually covered for theft? So if someone breaks into your vehicle and steals stuff, will it count? And you also need to double check that fine print. Is it theft coverage for, there'll be all these little things about sometimes you won't be covered for work if you're using your own personal vehicle. So definitely check the fine print on that. Sometimes you won't get theft if the vehicle's not stored out in front of your house in a well-lit street. There'll be all these little bits and pieces in there. And it's sort of not thought about, but definitely theft and other types of, other bits of insurance. And if the company, if they are insured for theft for the personal belongings of their employees. Because, you could say leave your personal laptop in a vehicle. You guys go out to do some survey, come back at the end of the day, someone smashed open, the windows with a rock and taken everything out. It's worth seeing if you're actually covered for personal equipment for anything that you bring along. And laptop, or even, you might just leave your phone in there thinking, there's no cell reception, so why bring it? And you just leave it in the car, and then, you're in trouble if it's not covered by the insurance. So another accessory to think about is your personal insurance, your coverage from your employer. And, if you want to pay extra, if it's not covered, you can sometimes buy sort of ad hoc or, bespoke bits of insurance as well. And that might be worth thinking about.
The one thing also that brings up the fact that, there are most, actually, I would say a majority of the CRM companies out there, if you're driving your own vehicle, you're not going to be covered on their insurance. And a lot of people, unfortunately, do not find this out until after they're in that situation. And now they thought that if something happened to their car while out in the field, that it would be covered by the company, and it's not. So just make sure that you are aware of that. That would be a question that you would ask. And, companies write into their budgets rental cars or the use of their actual fleet. So just make sure that you are you're going into a project with full knowledge of what you're covered on, and make sure that if something happens and you are using your own car, that you're covered. Otherwise, it's going to be on your insurance, and companies are not going to reimburse you. Very few will.
Yeah, and just know your own insurance, kind of like what Doug was talking a little bit about this earlier. What's your deductible? Sometimes people just don't even know this stuff, because they just think of insurance as this thing you just have to pay to drive your car. What is your coverage? Is it small? Is it big? So I would say look at that, and also think critically about your deductible. the deductible is how much you have to pay out of pocket kind of before the insurance kicks in. I usually have a fairly high deductible just because I drive like old crappy cars, and it brings your insurance down if you have a higher deductible. So I'll have like a, $2,000 deductible or something, which means that I just pay for all the stupid stuff that happens to my car, which is fine, but they'll pay for it if something catastrophic happens, right? So that's where I go, but also I drive very cheap, crappy cars. With that, this is a good time to sort of turn this around, and we'll continue in segment 3. See you in a minute. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 298, and we have been talking about car accessories. And I know that, Doug, you had something to add.
Yeah, it was sort of internal accessories, and I have a couple. One is, I'm not actually sure what the correct term is, but I'd call it an airline pillow. You guys, the neck ones, the little donuts that go around your neck. Yeah. I should probably look up the term. I call them airline pillows, but I'm not sure.
I think people just call them like donut pillows and stuff. Everyone knows those.
Yeah. Depending on how long your drive is going to be, a couple of those in there for your crew in case anyone wants to take a nap is always much appreciated.
I'll wash them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't get the ones that are get the ones that you can unzip and take off the outer casing and wash. Most definitely. The other thing is sort of an interesting one where it's for older cars, but it's going to be super valuable for newer cars as well, is the radio adapter for your phone, which is, or, music device, if you have one, they come in a range of different flavors, but for the most part, they attach to your phone, or, if you still have a, iPod, or I don't know, Android, for some reason, I feel like you'd have a Zune or something like that, but
no, I'll tell you mine. So
what is it?
Yeah. In terms of the radio, it's so funny. On my list was a decent stereo, and I don't mean you have to go out and buy a crazy awesome stereo, but we choose what to fix on our older cars. I think having just a good sound system that works is nice, because it's just so nice to be able to listen to your music. If you have an older car, check this out, dude. I have a tape deck right in my field vehicle, which is a 1991 Isuzu Trooper, and what I've found is, so most of us have CD players we no longer use, but a tape deck is actually easier to connect your phone to than a CD player, right? So I connect my iPhone just straight into the tape deck, because you can get an adapter. They're like really cheap, and that works actually really well. It's better than the systems that feed straight into your radio, where you have to tune to a certain channel, because I find a lot of those get static. So funnily enough, if you happen to have a tape player still in your car, you could end up with better quality sound out of your phone.
Yeah, I was going to say is definitely for older vehicles, because they won't have those accessories, but weirdly also for a lot more newer vehicles as well, because cars are becoming a bit more like phones, in that there's now becoming problems where the car companies are no longer doing software updates for their cars. And, cars are now becoming, I say cars as in vehicles, cars, trucks, vans, everything. Yeah. Just know when I say car, I mean your vehicle. I'll try to say vehicle.
Yeah, I do the same.
Yeah. Your vehicles, they're more closer to your laptop than, say, a vehicle of like 20 or 30 years ago. And a lot of them require now software, and, they do cool things where, all you have to do is just plug in your USB for your phone and it automatically syncs up and all that stuff. But now a lot of car companies are just basically being like, after 5 years or 8 years, we're no longer doing updates.
Planned obsolescence.
Yeah. And so now, your newer phone might not be able to sync with your car. So you might not have that direct, wonderful, I can just plug it in and then play whatever music I want. And that's why I was saying, actually, that sort of, you could get that adapter for cassette tapes if your vehicle's that old, or that radio ones, which actually, Andrew, you did point out, it can be finicky at times as you drive around and you have to switch channels, but it'll be good for older vehicles, and it's going to be probably a must for newer vehicles in a couple of years, because you actually won't be able to connect up your phone.
Yeah.
The software won't work. You might have that golden, cars that are maybe like 10 years old. Sorry, vehicles that are like 10 years old where they accepted it but didn't quite need as much software, might still work in the future. But yeah, you're a lot of the newer vehicles. Yeah. Get prepared to have to go old school on connecting them up.
Yeah, totally. In terms of interior too, I would recommend fixing your air conditioning if it's broken. That can be a big expense. It just depends. But think about it, man. When you're out in the field, just nothing beats going into your car and like blasting the air conditioning. And it can basically be like a health thing. You can be so hot that like the air conditioning can really just help you out from basically, passing out from heat exhaustion. So I would recommend saving up the money and fixing your AC if it's broken.
Yeah, without getting into talking about what cars, and we have another episode that you can search and look at that. But, it's just be careful about getting something that is highly electronic, because for the reasons that Doug is mentioning, and also because, when you are in the middle of nowhere and something happens, it's a lot harder to troubleshoot. So just be conscious of that. A couple things that I love: if you're buying a new car, a truck with a AC outlet is awesome and very, very helpful for a myriad of different reasons for tasks that you're doing out in the field. And if you don't have that, then there's some great converters that you can purchase from most hardware stores. They're about $30, $40, and they're great because usually they'll have 2 AC outlets in them that go into your cigarette lighter. And then they also have USB and the mini, whatever you call them. I forget what the
various charging situations.
All the adapters that you need. Yeah. Yep. So that has been a lifesaver for me. If you are somebody who's a crew lead, and let's say you're trying to also input data while they're out in the field, this is more of a computer accessory, but it's a computer accessory that you have in order to do work in the field in your vehicle. So I would consider it a field accessory, and that is attachable monitors. I swear by them. They're amazing. And if you have a car with enough room where you can actually use them, then being able to have additional monitors to actually get that work done while the crew is actually working is a huge plus. It is for me, but it wouldn't be for everybody who's in the field, right? But if you're a crew supervisor and you're having to knock out the report while the work's being done, or at least portions of the report, or processing data, that's important. If you have money, and let's say you're a company, right? I wouldn't do this for personal people, but if it's a small company, a Starlink is great. And being able to set up a Starlink right where you're at, we have that, and we can set it up anywhere. We have no matter where you are, we have reception. So that's an extra plus.
Yeah, that's cool. I find even if I'm out there and I have to type stuff up, even having like a decent sized pillow to put like on your lower back or whatever, you have to find a place to kind of sit, in your car and do work. A pillow will give you so many more angles. I have a couple like last minute things I don't think we talked about. Like, make sure to have some jumper cables. Jumper cables I've used a bunch of times, just make sure that they're decent. Like decent quality. Get the ones there's ones that are a little heavier gauge and a little lighter gauge. Get the heavier gauge, spend the extra money. It's a little bit safer. I also really like having a shop manual. This is not the full on, you're an actual mechanic manual, but there's Haynes Corporation makes Haynes manuals for cars, especially for slightly older ones. Those are great. If you're like, wait, what happened to my car? You can kind of look it up and get some tidbits for fixing it. And then make sure something as simple as know your oil. Have a quart of spare oil. What oil does your car take? Does it take 530? Does it take 020? Right? Know your oil type, know your viscosity, and be ready with it. Doug, what's up?
Yeah, so this is sort of a nice to have accessory. And it goes back to a bit of talking about like power outlets and things like that, and also sort of an alternative for jumper cables. So, a lot of people now, it's become quite common. You carry your spare field battery. So people always had those like small little batteries for your phone. And now, people are carrying the sort of other more industrial ones that can be used for like laptops and other accessories. There is a sort of adapter where you can basically attach it to a car battery and use that as sort of a spare battery. It's sort of one of those, maybe if you want to carry just a little bit less kit, is you can have that for, just have a spare car battery there. You can use that for charging stuff. And then you also have that spare vehicle battery right there. You just have to make sure you haven't taken it all down, but they're rechargeable. So as long as you just have even this tiniest little bit of charge and you replace it, it should be good to go. And then your converter will, you'll charge back up the battery as soon as you got it. So as long as you just make sure you leave a little bit of capacity in that, it can slightly cut down on needing to carry extra spare batteries for laptops, and all that, your extra equipment. But again, that's sort of more of a nice to have, not necessarily a key thing. Some people might like it, some might not, but it's something to consider, is just having a spare battery, but also doubling it up to charge some of your other electronics if you need it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's exactly what we're talking about. Yeah, I think that's smart. Heather, you said you got one more?
Yeah, I have one more comment. Just a good practice to get into is to create lists for yourself. Number one, the safety list. So you have what you check, and it's worth the extra 15 minutes before you're going out, maybe the night before or the first thing in the morning, to check to make sure you have everything you need. So number one would be a safety list that you're going to use every single time. You make sure you have everything's up to date, and just do it every time. Get in the practice of doing that every time you go out. Number two, have a list of accessories that you need for each level of field work. So there's a few things that I would always have in the truck, and you can add those to each one of those lists, but how often do we go out in the field and we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot the breaker bar,
Yeah.
And so it's have your list, have it laminated, and go through it, or have somebody go through it, so that you make sure that you have everything you need, because you want to be as effective, efficient as possible, and forgetting a key piece of equipment, it is going to derail you. So having those lists, I think, are that way you don't have to think through it. Oh my gosh, okay, what should I have here? What should I have here? Just make a list. And over time, you'll add things to it. But if you have that list, then you don't even have to think about it when you're packing up at 5 a.m. in the morning or the 9 o'clock the night before.
Right. No, that's great. I use lists all the time like that. As we were talking, I was thinking, like, in my mind's eye, looking in my like rear seat of my car, and I'm like, okay, what do I use? What helps me out? And we've talked about this before on the show, but like, I would say make sure to have like some spare shoes, some spare socks, man. Spare socks have saved my ass, right, a bunch of times, and a spare backpack, because when you're in the field, it's like your backpack strap will break, you're like, oh no. So I've had this like old crappy backpack with like some old shoes and socks in it, and an old sweatshirt, right, just sitting like in the far corner of my car forever and ever with my safety stuff, and I've used that so much.
I still have the backpack that I had when I was in your class. That's my spare backpack.
My spare backpack is every one of my daughter's ancient backpacks from when she was 5.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it'll be like a backpack with a kitty on it, and that's my spare like shoes and socks. Anyway, Doug, you got one more.
Yeah, it was just to sort of expand on some of the other comments you guys had said earlier in some other segments. Was just sort of like a car safety kit is to check out and see what they have. The ones with like the little reflective triangles and that sort of stuff. Because when you were saying, make sure you have a good like lug nut kit, but it also, basically that entire safety aspect, like checking out what your vehicle has, and maybe thinking about slightly upgrading that. Like you don't necessarily need road flares and stuff like that, but do you actually have, a quality lug nut wrench? Do you have like some maybe reflectors. Sometimes some of those emergency kits have like these little flashing lights that your battery powered that you can just toss on the back of your vehicle. If your battery's dead, you're not going to have your emergency lights.
Yep.
And, especially depending on where you are. So if, you're in pretty rural areas with a lot of bends, depends what the locals are like. But some people take those, roads that should be 30 miles an hour at 60 going around.
Yeah.
And if you've broken down on a curve, a nice little curve right there, you want to have something that's there. So even just like going a bit above and beyond wherever is the default for your vehicle on the safety, I'd recommend just having that extra stuff. If it's triangles or just those little flashing, you can even just substitute little bicycle lights.
Yeah.
If you put on their helmet, just something that you need there to let people know that you're broken down on the side is always going to be helpful, especially, if you're broken down for a while and it ends up being, nighttime when you're still out there. Those things will be quite helpful. I don't quite think you need to go like the full road flare, but to each their own. So maybe some people really do want that, but the problem with those is
they expire.
Yeah. So
And
it's usually better to get like a battery powered light than something along those lines.
I like the collapsible triangles that pop up, and some actually have the flashing lights on them.
Yeah, totally. So speaking of going like, a bit over the top or getting the extra, one last thing that reminded me of is if you do have a AAA membership, you'll have the choice for like 100-mile towing, I think it is. And it's like an extra $20 a year or something like that. Dude, buy the extra towing. I've used it. I've gotten a 90-mile tow once, and it's free. So I highly recommend any CRM professionals out there get the AAA with the like long towing, because you're in the middle of nowhere. And without the like 100-mile towing, AAA only pays for like the first 7 or 8 miles or something like that, and then it's you paying for the tow. So it's cheap insurance. And with that wraps up another scintillating episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you guys next time.
That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRMArcPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
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 This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.